The senator from Maine is recognized.
Mr. President, I rise to urge my colleagues to end the reckless Democratic shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security. This shutdown has caused chaos at our airports, delayed assistance to communities hit by disasters, and forced thousands of essential frontline employees at TSA, at the Coast Guard, at the Cybersecurity Agency to work without any guarantee of when they will be paid. More than 50,000 TSA agents and officers who help keep us safe are currently working without pay, with many forced to find second or new jobs to make ends meet. Some are so discouraged that they have quit. Over the weekend, we saw security lines at some American airports stretch for more than 3 hours as a result of TSA staffing shortages. And what, Mr. President, is the Democratic response? According to one Democratic senator, they are, quote, very serene with what is going on, end quote. How can you be serene, Mr. President, when you have increased the danger to the United States of contraband being smuggled into this country, or a terrorist attack occurring, or illegal substances being smuggled onto our airports? Mr. President, I don't like to be partisan, but the fact is the American people need to know that the Democrats created this chaos when they walked away from the bipartisan, fully negotiated DHS funding bill and then blocked repeated Republican attempts to pass a short-term funding measure to prevent these disruptions that are so harmful both to our country, security, and to the employees while the negotiations continue. They claim that they need meaningful policy changes to support fully funding the department, but their approach to resolving this impasse has been characterized by a lack of urgency and a lack of seriousness. We are nearly a month into the shutdown of this vital department, and today marks 2 weeks of the Senate Democratic leadership sitting on what is a good faith offer from the White House to end the shutdown. Democrats have even rebuffed entreaties from Senate Republican negotiators to meet, to bridge the differences between the two sides, to discuss the White House offer, which, believe me, answers many of the concerns that have been raised without endangering our law enforcement officers. Instead, they put forward a bill that takes the bipartisan measure that we negotiated in January and completely strips the funding for immigration and customs enforcement and customs and border protection. Now, while defunding ICE and CBP may resonate well with far-left activists, it is not a serious public policy solution. I want to take a moment to highlight some of the work that ICE and CBP do, which goes far beyond immigration enforcement and helps to keep our country safe. Mr. President, more than a quarter of ICE's annual appropriated budget is for Homeland Security investigations. They're referred to as HSIs. Now, let me explain what HSIs are. This unit is charged with investigating the illegal movement of people, goods, contraband, weapons, and sensitive technology into, out of, and through the United States. HSI's agents are tasked with combating cartels, human smuggling, child exploitation, forced labor, and investigating international financial crimes. Do we really want to defund those vital investigations, Mr. President? I think not. CBP, too, does far more than just immigration enforcement. It is responsible for facilitating legal trade and travel throughout the United States. It screens goods for drugs and protects U.S. industry through its efforts to detect illegal imports, duty evasions, and counterfeits. Its Office of Trade works to ensure that products made with forced labor are not allowed into our country, and that businesses are unable to profit from human trafficking. CBP's air and marine operations patrols our maritime borders. Its agricultural specialists work to prevent the spread of pests and foreign plants being brought into this country. Last Congress, Mr. President, the Democratic leadership of the Homeland Security Appropriations Subcommittee held a hearing, an excellent hearing, entitled Combating Transnational Criminal Organizations and Related Trafficking. The witnesses for that hearing were, not surprisingly, representatives of HSI and CBP. These agencies and their work and the importance of it were highlighted. And I quote the Democratic appropriations lead, who said they are playing a critical role in interrupting the flow of fentanyl into the United States. That same Democratic senator said proposed cuts to these accounts would be catastrophic to their ability to fight cartels. Now, the other side of the aisle suggests that we defund those exact same efforts. Mr. President, we cannot continue this way. Real challenges are worthy of a serious response, a response that does not harm our country. Today, Republicans are again taking steps to restore funding to the Department of Homeland Security and these critical missions. Shortly, we will have an opportunity to vote on allowing the Senate to debate and amend the Homeland Security appropriations bills. Once on the bill, I believe that we should consider the White House's good faith February 26 offer, which the Democrats have yet to respond to, even though it addresses many of the concerns that they have raised and that many of us have raised. This offer would build on the reforms that were included in the bipartisan funding bill negotiated earlier this year, which included new safeguards to protect the American public and our law enforcement and increased oversight. For example, our bipartisan bill had $20 million, which we added, for body-worn cameras. Those cameras help to protect both law enforcement officers and the people with whom they are interacting. But the White House offer would go considerably further by increasing substantially the funding for the body-worn cameras. I don't know why my Democratic colleagues would not see that as great progress. It goes beyond what we had previously negotiated in a completely bipartisan way. There are many other critically important substantive reforms that are included in the White House's offer. But what do we hear from the Democratic leadership? Nothing. Nothing in the 2 weeks since the offer was submitted. They won't even sit down and discuss the offer. I just do not understand it. The White House's offer represents a good faith, honest attempt to find reasonable compromises on the differences with our Democratic colleagues. It deserves a good faith, reasonable, honest response. Instead, silence. Mr. President, the stakes are far too high. Democrats, to my Democratic colleagues, please stop playing political games when so much is at stake. Work with us to govern. Let's be responsible. Mr. President, it's time for our Democratic colleagues to get serious. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Board is recognized.
Mr. President, I'm honored to rise on the Senate floor today to recognize one of Florida's best. Last month, a Martin County man was going about his day when he saw a terrible crash behind him in his rearview mirror. And what he did next was truly remarkable and heroic. The car behind him had crashed into a canal and was sinking underwater. Casey Curtis, who I am told is watching this, didn't hesitate. He jumped into the water, ready to help, and when he got out there, he found 3 young children stuck in the back, screaming for help of that sinking vehicle, and their mother was unconscious behind the wheel. Casey acted quickly. He helped free the kids. He got them to dry land, and then he turned back and went to the driver. He stayed in the water, holding the unconscious woman's head above the water to keep her from drowning until the first responders got there. Because of his courageous efforts, this mother and her 3 children are still alive. The family is still together because he selflessly acted without hesitation and put others' safety ahead of his own. I am so proud to honor him today with a Florida's Finest Award. This is not somebody who dedicated his professional career in law enforcement. He didn't take an oath. He just decided that day he was going to be someone's guardian. And he chose to do what few others would have chosen to do. This award honors Floridians and law enforcement officers who demonstrate selfless courage and go above and beyond to save lives. Casey did not have to do what he did that day, but what he did makes him remarkable, and we are so proud of his efforts. So thank you, Casey, for stepping in, risking your own safety to save a family. You are truly one of Florida's finest. I yield back, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Democratic leader is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. In a few moments, my friend and colleague, the senator from Nevada, will offer a unanimous consent request that is very simple. It funds TSA. No conditions, no ifs, ands, or buts. It just says we are funding TSA. If Republicans want to see our TSA workers get paid, they should not object. It's very simple. We know we need to straighten this out. Many people have different formulas, but plain and simple. You want to fund TSA with no conditions, no preconditions, just yes or no, no ands, ifs, or buts. Do not block the resolution. If Republicans block this resolution, we'll know they don't want to fund TSA because this is the simplest, quickest, easiest way to do it. Our colleagues on the other side said, oh, no, we don't want to fund it unless we have a compromise or we have a deal on other parts of ICE and CPB. That is holding the TSA agents and the American people hostage. We're not holding any hostages. We're just saying we need to fund TSA. We need to fund it now. No ands, ifs, or buts. No questions asked. No preconditions. The American people will see. The Rosen proposal is simple. If Republicans block it, they're standing in the way of funding TSA now. I yield to my colleague. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The majority whip is recognized.
Mr. President, I just hear the minority leader come to the floor of the United States and say what the Democrats want to do is peel apart the Department of Homeland Security, a department that was set up in this nation after the attacks of 9/11, the attacks that struck the home city of the minority leader, took down the Twin Towers. This Department of Homeland Security was set up specifically to protect our nation. Multiple components put together to protect America, the American people. And what are the Democrats doing today? They're coming to the floor to peel it apart and say, oh, no, we're not interested in protecting the border. Oh, no, we're not interested in making sure illegal immigrant criminals are taken out of the country. No, that's not what they're doing. They're coming and saying, we're going to just take this part or that part. This is a comprehensive plan, the Department of Homeland Security, to protect our nation. That's what we're seeing here today. That's why they're here. Our cybersecurity is under attack. Our people are under attack. Our nation is under attack. And we need to defend ourselves, and we need a full Department of Homeland Security. Not what we're going to see in the next hour is one can, oh, no, let's fund this little part. No, let's fund this little part. No, let's fund this little part. As they don't want to fund the Department of Homeland Security. They said, well, hey, the Department of Homeland Security is there to guard our coast. We have the Coast Guard in there. We have FEMA for emergency management of federal problems. We have our cybersecurity, where today 1/3 of those people are working, not getting paid, and 2/3 today, right this very moment, are furloughed. And that seems to be fine with the Democrats. They don't seem to care because they are so committed to the illegal immigrants who are criminals and in this country, let in by Joe Biden and them. Over 10 million flooded into the country during the last 4 years. And they are so beholden and detached to the far left component of this nation that they don't care about everybody else. We've had terrorist attacks right here on the homeland. 2 in the last 2 weeks. And so we're going to stand here, we're going to listen to this little unanimous consent agreement and that one at the time when our homeland is under attack. All warning lights are flashing red, and they want to peel apart, piece by piece, the Department of Homeland Security, the comprehensive department of our government, to protect the American people because they want to stand with illegal immigrant criminals. Thank you, Mr. President.
Way to go. Senator from Ohio is recognized.
You know, I've only had the honor, and I call it an honor, honestly, an honor to serve as a United States Senator for 14 months. Every day when I drive down Pennsylvania, make a left on Constitution, and see the sunrise over the Capitol, I genuinely feel the weight of how important this office is. And I actually have incredible admiration, not for my forefathers came from South America, but for the forefathers of the people who built this country, to think of the wisdom of what our founders envisioned. Our founders created an institution that is genuinely, it gives me chills to think about the genius of what they did. They created a House of Representatives where every 2 years there's an election, there's a lot of friction that goes on, and a simple majority passes a bill. And yet they wanted the Senate to be more deliberative. They wanted to force us, Mr. President. You know, and you personally know how hard it is. They wanted to force us to have strong conversations with the opposing party to get to a resolution. They really did. They didn't want it to just be simple majority rule. They wanted to make it really difficult. But what I've experienced over the last 14 months, I got to tell you, is decently disappointing. Because for me, what I think should unite us is what do the American people really want from us? What is it that they want their leaders to do? We've now seen it 3 times in a row this year, where my Democrat colleagues have shut the government down. Now, what does that mean? You hear a lot of speeches. What it means is that if you're a government employee, tomorrow's Friday and it's payday, you're not getting a check. Imagine what that feels like. You're a dad. Imagine what that feels like to have to explain to your kids why you went to work. You did your job. You didn't do anything wrong. And you don't have the money that you need to pay your basic bills. And yet us here in the United States Senate, our paychecks are uninterrupted. We get paid to do our job a lot more, magnitude more money than average Americans make. We'll leave here today and travel to far-off places. And yet we'll walk by TSA agents that aren't getting paid. We expect Border Patrol to do their job. We expect Customs to do their job. We expect FEMA to do their job. I have a big Coast Guard presence in Ohio. We need them to do their job, and yet none of them are getting paid. They did nothing wrong. There wasn't a single employee of the Department of Homeland Security who is affected by this that they personally are the reason this department is funded. So I truly, truly, from the bottom of my heart, ask my Democrat colleagues, with all absolutely desire to get a result, is let's spend 2 weeks. And we can start today, by the way. There's no reason for us to go home. I'm willing to start today, like we start right now. And we sit down together. We look at the appropriations bill for the entire Department of Homeland Security, and in good faith, not with political theater, not to score political points, not to be cool on social media, but actually sit in a room and say, let's get this entire department funded. Let's not leave here today and walk by a TSA agent knowing that we are the reason they're not getting paid. That's unacceptable. Let's sit down together over 2 weeks. For 2 weeks. We can do that for 14 days. I'm willing to stay in Washington, D.C. for 14 days and hash out an agreement. We can do it. That's what our voters want. That's why they elected us. They don't want us to be shirts and skins on everything. So, Mr. President, I ask make a very simple motion. I think most Americans would appreciate. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to immediate consideration of calendar number 156, H.R. 4553. I further ask that the substitute amendment number 4353 be considered and agreed to, the bill as amended to be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table. What that means is that we can fund the employees of the Department of Homeland Security now while we spend 2 weeks working together to get a resolution.
Is there an objection to the motion?
Mr. President,
Senator from Nevada is recognized.
I object. We've had more than 2 weeks. I'm sorry.
Question's heard.
Do I need to say something different?
Yep, nope, I understand. Look, look, I understand the political pressures, I really do. We'll see that sometimes appealing to a certain voter bloc is maybe what makes us popular, but I want to read you a quote from the Democrat whip, Deputy Democrat whip, a senior appropriator, by the way, who said, "We are very serene with what's going on." We're very serene with what's going on. You're serene that tonight, a dad, a mom is going to come home and say, "Can't do that. Can't pay for your dentist recital. Can't pay for your spring break ticket because just didn't get a paycheck." I want you to explain to a 12-year-old child why you're not getting paid. They're going to talk about Senate procedure. They're going to talk about the appropriations process. Look, this is just another effort to distract us from what's going on here. So again, I just urge my Democrat colleague to consider, as you think about your own state. Now, by the way, I genuinely believe you deeply care about your state. I hear you talk about it, and it's absolutely sincere. You deeply care about your state. Think about those Border Patrol agents that are welcoming visitors from all over the world to Las Vegas. Think about those ICE agents that are arresting criminal aliens, like the one that was just recently arrested. That was a pretty bad guy. Imagine those TSA agents, the Coast Guard, FEMA, cybersecurity. You have a lot of those resources in your state. Can I please ask you for some level of humanity to get this done? Reconsider your objection, and let's fund the Department of Homeland Security TSA agents for 2 weeks. Please, I ask you to do that. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from Nevada is recognized.
you know, I appreciate my colleagues, but we've had more than 2 weeks. So where have you been? Where have you been? This is a non-starter. Come to the table. Let's give ICE the same training as local law enforcement, as our FBI. We want ICE agents that are transparent, trained, and accountable, not acting above the law. So now, we're almost a month into the Republican shutdown of Homeland Security. The Republicans control the White House, the House, and the Senate. So let's remember how we got here. Donald Trump and Kristi Noem were so eager to carry out their cruel mass deportation agenda that they actually cut training for ICE officers from 5 months, imagine this, 47 days. Why 47 days? Well, you can't even make this up because it honors Donald Trump, who's the 47th president. So you cut down 500 days to 47 days? What are you thinking about adequate training? By cutting training, increasing recruitment, Trump and Kristi Noem sent thousands of untrained agents with their guns and their badges into communities all across this country. They added deportation quotas for these officers to meet. And Trump and Kristi Noem pushed these untrained officers to round up as many people as they could wherever they could, and that included legal immigrants and American citizens. That's right. Instead of deporting illegal, violent criminals, something we do all agree on, by the way, they went after legal permanent residents, visa holders, law-abiding citizens, with all devastating consequences when we saw 2 of our fellow Americans brutally murdered in Minneapolis. The American people were rightfully horrified and angry, and they demanded accountability, which is exactly what Senate Democrats are pushing for. We proposed a common sense, basic idea that ICE officers, should just be required to follow the same standards that law enforcement, our local law enforcement, all of my colleagues here, your law enforcement, have to follow. That's it. Simple. We want ICE officers to wear body cams and roving patrols, use judicial warrants, and to respect people's rights. It should be a no-brainer. Democrats have been ready and willing in good faith to enact these common sense reforms, fund the department, and keep our country safe. And shamefully, our Republican colleagues have refused to pass these reforms. They'd rather see the Homeland Security Department shut down than pass common sense guardrails to hold ICE accountable, rein them in. And as a result, the American people are paying the price. Travelers at our airports seeing longer lines, TSA officers being forced to work without pay. As the senator from Nevada, you're right, I know just how serious this situation is. My state relies heavily on tourism. More than 50 million visitors travel to Nevada every year to attend conventions, visit our beautiful public lands, enjoy live entertainment, sports, and we support hundreds of thousands of hospitality workers. Air travel, the gateway to our economy. So when TSA staffing levels drop because officers aren't getting paid, wait times at airport security checkpoints, they stretch longer and longer. It doesn't just inconvenience travelers. It does undermine security, directly threatens jobs, businesses, and livelihoods across our state. That's why I rise today with a very simple and practical proposal. If we can't move forward funding the entire department, sitting down, negotiating in good faith, which you've had plenty of time to do already, we should be at least able to come together to pay the hardworking staff of one of its most essential components, TSA. Let's not have TSA officers in the middle of this fight. They don't deserve it. We all agree their salaries should be funded, so let's fund it. Let's do it. Today I'm asking my colleagues to take a simple step. Let's pass my legislation right now, pay the TSA workers so that commercial air travel remains safe and functional. Our TSA agents receive the pay they have earned. I'm introducing this bill today with Commerce Committee Ranking Member Cantwell so that we can finally get our airports moving again. If Republicans are going to insist on shutting down the Department of Homeland Security, they should at the very least join us ensuring that the traveling public does not pay the price. They even implied in their own tweet that they're for funding TSA. So let's see what that's true, because you know what? Tweets are easy. Tweets are easy. Talk is easy. Will they back up what they say with their vote? We're about to find out. So I ask unanimous consent that Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S 4073, submitted earlier today, and that would fund the TSA, and that the bill be considered a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection? Senator from Ohio is recognized.
Reserving the right to object, I just offered to fund the Department of Homeland Security 5 minutes ago. In fact, I said in good faith, we can sit down, have a conversation, and get this thing done. I just did that. And why are we saying TSA agents, who I totally respect, but how about the Border Patrol guys and gals? How about Customs? How about FISA? How about FEMA? How about the Coast Guard? Are we saying we don't want to, we're going to penalize all of them? Why would we do that? Let's fund the whole department. Let's get this over with. In fact, I would even offer, let's fund it until Monday. And that's all, every single United States senator agree to stay here until Monday, until we get this negotiated. And in the meantime, we fund the department. We retroactively pay every single worker. And if that's not acceptable, I'll ask one more, and I'll be the first one to offer it. If the answer is that we leave here today without funding the Department of Homeland Security, every single senator should give their paycheck to a charity of their choice until, and retroactively from the beginning of the shutdown, we get this department funded. We should not get paid while government employees who did nothing are not getting paid. And for that reason, I object to that narrow funding of certain people and not others.
The objection is heard. Senator from Kansas is recognized.
Mr. President, every day the Democrats refuse to fund DHS. They choose politics over the safety and security of our nation.
Stop.
What is it?
The senator will suspend. The senator from Nevada still has the floor.
Senator from Nevada still has the floor. My
Thank you.
Sorry. Senator
know
from
what?
Nevada is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. We can fully fund DHS right now, if Washington Republicans just agree to common sense reforms for ICE, the same ones that local law enforcement have. Identify yourself. Wear a body camera. It's good for the agent and for the community. Get full training. Respect our Bill of Rights. We want them to be trained, transparent, and accountable like every other law enforcement officer in this country. And so I find it extremely disappointing that you haven't come to the table for those common sense reforms so far. We can let TSA and other parts of Homeland go and continue to negotiate. And let's remember that the big, beautiful bill gave tens of billions of dollars to ICE. They're not running out of money or any pay anytime soon. I yield.
Mr. President.
Senator from Kansas is recognized now.
Mr. President, every day the Democrats refuse to fund DHS. They choose politics over the safety and security of our nation. They continue to be the party of open borders and defund the police. And to make it worse, they continue to refuse to meet. I'm sitting here, it's like I'm watching a divorce and two parents fighting over the kids. The Democrats say they want to meet, but they won't meet. The White House sent them an offer 14 days ago. There's been no response. There's been no official response. There's been no communication back to the White House. I know that the chairperson in part of DHS appropriations, that she's reached out multiple times to her counterpart, but they refuse to sit down. The same way with the chairwoman of the appropriations committee. The same thing with our majority whip and our majority leader, that they've reached out to their counterparts and asked to sit down. So someone's lying here, okay? Somebody is lying. I know that our appropriations folks would sit down this afternoon and work this out. I absolutely believe that they could, and that's why in a moment I'm going to ask that we fund DHS for 2 weeks. That should be the goal, that should be the objective. I will almost guarantee if calm minds get set in the same room and go through their ask on ICE, we'll figure something out. But there's no negotiations if the other side won't sit down here. And that's what America needs to know, is that the Democrats refuse to respond to the White House. They refuse to negotiate a person to person. So we're happy to have this debate right here and right now. Mr. President, in a second, I'm going to offer a clean 2-week CR to fully fund DHS. I'm asking we fund DHS for 2 weeks to protect American lives, and then come back and talk, and let's work through our differences. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 156, H.R. 4553. I further ask that the substitute amendment number 4353 be considered and agreed to. The bill is amended, be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
Senator from New Jersey is recognized.
I object.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President,
Senator from Kansas.
again, Mr. President, we've asked to fund DHS for 2 weeks. My colleagues have different ideas on what to do here. But I think that we absolutely owe it to our friends and neighbors back home that our country is less safe today when we don't have DHS funded, that they cooperate to keep us safe. I'm every bit as concerned about sleeper cells waking up today, Iranian sleeper cells waking up today, and carrying out attacks on Americans. I'm every bit as concerned about that as I am for the safety of our own soldiers' lives. So I appreciate the objectors' concerns here and look forward to figuring out a way to get DHS open. I yield back.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Jersey recognized.
Mr. President, I share these concerns about the safety and security of the American people. I spent my career working in national security and counterterrorism, and these are exactly the reasons why we need to make sure that we are taking the steps that we can agree upon. There is no doubt, as we have had debate after debate this week, we know we are far apart still when it comes to immigration when it comes to that aspect of the Department of Homeland Security. But what the American people know and what every family has to deal with is you also can think through what it is that you do agree on, try to move forward with that, and try to then further focus in on the issues where there are disagreement on. I think that's a very pragmatic idea, pragmatic approach that the American people can understand. So in just a few moments, I will ask my colleagues to pass common sense legislation to fund the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency known as CISA. And I know maybe the American people are not as familiar with this aspect of the Department of Homeland Security, but I think that they understand that we are in a different moment now than we were just a couple weeks ago when these negotiations began. We are now a nation at war. We are a nation at war because of Donald Trump moving forward without the approval of this body, which the Constitution outlines, in terms of the approval of a declaration of war. So we find ourselves at a time when our service members are in harm's way. Several have already lost their lives. When diplomatic posts, as a former State Department officer, I'm worried about our embassies. And then here at home, concern about our own homeland security. And when the president was asked about this, should we be concerned about threats to our homeland? He said, I guess so. That's what he said. He said, I guess so. People may die. That's what happens in war. I am finding that absolutely unacceptable for a commander-in-chief to talk about homeland threats with that level of blasé attitude. We all know that Iran has the capabilities of cybersecurity attacks on the United States. We've seen it before. And we've seen this administration, even before this war, taking steps to gut this agency that is in charge of so much of the critical infrastructure, cybersecurity protections. They have forced out and reassigned personnel to other missions. They have attempted to slash the budget. The agency, CISA, has lost 1/3 of its workforce under this administration and the abysmal leadership of Secretary Noem. And as I said on the floor yesterday, we are at war, and we need to understand that we should take all the steps available to be able to push forward on the tools that we need. And when it comes to immigration, we know that the Republicans pushed forward on the funding to that through the reconciliation bill last year. So let's make sure that the rest of the Department of Homeland Security, including this incredibly important aspect of CISA, is able to step up at this dangerous time. And I hope Republicans can join us and make good on that obligation today by funding CISA. And that's why I'm asking my colleagues to pass this bill to fund our cybersecurity workers and ensure that we have the resources in place to counter these threats. That should be something I hope all of us can agree upon. And now is the time to put the politics aside and focus on that. So, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S-4074, submitted earlier today, and that would fund CISA, that this bill be considered, read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider is considered, made, and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
Senator from Kansas is recognized.
reserving the right to object. Mr. President, just 10 minutes ago, we offered to fund CISA and all of DHS. I'm not going to leave behind TSA. I'm not going to leave behind the Coast Guard. I'm not going to leave behind FEMA. I'm not going to leave behind ICE and Border Patrol. My colleague mentions his experience on the State Department, which I have great respect for. And he knows that if one agency is closed down, it impacts everybody else in the State Department. And he also should understand, and I know he does, I know that he understands this, that if you shut down, leave part of DHS shut down, it impacts everybody else. That this is a domino of problems. There's no one on the Democratic side could argue that we wouldn't be safer if all of DHS was funded. No one can argue that we would be much safer as a nation if all of DHS is funded. But instead, with all due respect, my colleagues across the aisle are turning to politics. They acknowledge that the dangers that this country is in, but they continue to choose politics over the safety and well-being of our nation. Carving this up, carving the bill into separate pieces makes no sense. It's a blatant attempt to distract from the fact that they're putting American lives at risk every single day. I'd ask my colleagues pushing this piecemeal approach who voted against full DHS funding a dozen times. So Democrats have voted against DHS funding at least a dozen times. And they're going to vote against it again several times today. And I got to go back. This is the one place where we probably disagree on the facts, again, with respect to my colleagues. There's no negotiating happening if you won't sit down with us. There's no negotiating happening if you don't return or at least speak back to the White House and say, this is what we object to, this is what do you all want, right? I would ask my colleagues across the aisle to commit, as soon as our next vote is over with, to sit down with our approach team and work this out. But there's no negotiating happening, right, America? There's no negotiations happening. The Democrats will not sit down with this. It's because they like this political argument. I want to just draw the roadmap here. Under the previous White House, they let millions of people come across our border unvetted. Violent criminals, known terrorists, and these sleeper cells are now starting to open. Republicans took over. We secured the border. We empowered Border Patrol. We empowered ICE. We stopped the flow of illegal aliens and started deporting those criminals. And because of that, America is a safer place today. America is a much safer place today. But now you're trying to unwind everything and defund the police. You know, this is the theme here. Democrats defund the police. They want open borders. Republicans are the party of law and order. We want secure borders. We want ICE to do their job. The Democrats are now doing everything in their power to obstruct ICE's efforts to deport those threats. They've shut down funding for the entire agency, an agency that also has critical departments for identifying threats and keeping Americans' lives safe, like cybersecurity. This agency is a frontline cyber defense. And most Americans don't understand what cybersecurity agency is, but it's a frontline cyber defense, protects our grids, our hospitals, water systems, and more from relentless threats from China, Iran, and criminals. And I know my colleague who's worked in the State Department knows that those threats aren't just theoretical. Every day we're having thousands of cyber attacks. But the cybersecurity agency does not operate in a vacuum. They depend upon CBP and TSA and FEMA and Secret Service and Coast Guard to function. Funding one agency while starving the rest is like funding Patrick Mahomes, give him a lifelong salary, the best deal ever, but not giving him a good offensive tackle. We saw how that worked out last Super Bowl. You have to fund the whole agency. Again, the White House sent an offer 2 weeks ago. Crickets from the Democrats. Why don't you respond to what the White House sent you? Why don't you sit down with our approach team? Mr. President, with that, I object.
Mr. President.
Senator from Jersey is recognized.
Mr. President, I will say we are ready to negotiate. We are the ones that want to be at the table here, but look at what has happened since negotiations begun. Since we started this several weeks ago, we are again now at war. We are at war because a president refused to engage with this body, refused to engage with Congress about that, finding ourselves with these types of threats. Since the negotiations began, we now have a Department of Homeland Security secretary fired. You know, the department's in chaos right now. How are we to understand what roles they are going to be coming next, what this administration is going to be doing next, when they cannot even get their own department in order? So yes, we are going to continue to push. And as I said, we have still large disagreements. And I am as concerned with what's happening in Iran. I am as concerned about that here because we have about 30% of the casualties that we faced in Iran with this attack and this war with Iran. We saw that number, about 30% of that number in Minnesota. 2 American citizens killed in Minnesota. Still no formal independent investigation at the level that is needed. Still no answers. Still no assurances about what comes next. So that's why we've got to move forward, fund FISA, fund these other elements of Department of Homeland Security that can keep our country safe. And with that, I yield back.
Senator from Kansas.
I would just ask my colleague to commit for your appropriations people to sit down face to face with our appropriations committee staff and our members this afternoon. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back.
Mr. President.
Senator from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask for unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 156, H.R. 4553. I ask that the substitute amendment number 4353 be considered and agreed to, the bill as amended be considered, read a third time and passed, and that the motions to reconsider be considered and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President. Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut is recognized. The objection is heard.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the DHS bill that would fund all the things that are in the DHS bill that the Democrats negotiated until they pulled the rug out underneath that negotiation to politically grandstand on the Senate floor now for nearly a month. The truth of the matter is that I want to make the point for those who care about the way the Senate operates. First of all, we didn't have any appropriations bills the first 2 years. The majority party now has put appropriations bills on. There have been 11 out of 12. I was told that policy debates are not to enter the discussion on appropriations bills because things like this can happen. To my Democrat colleagues, if you have a bill that you want to defund ICE with, put it on the floor. I guarantee it'll get voted down because it's an extremely unpopular position. We're not going to let you get to that result by way of holding everyone else hostage. If you want to support all the agencies in this negotiated bill, you have a way to do it. But I think we really know what this is about. What this is really about is the Democrats lost an election where the issue of border enforcement and deportations were on the table, front and center in front of the voters, and the voters supported it. Recent polling still shows that. But to satisfy their radicalized base, which are the same people, these leftist NGOs that conjure and foment discontent, blow whistles, try to create confrontations with ICE agents, won't let them do it. And they're kind of stuck. So the only thing they have left now is the same playbook they ran a couple of months ago by shutting down the government, but this time they're shutting down DHS. And to make that clear, Joe Biden and the Democrats let 15 million people in here illegally, tens of thousands of murderers, hundreds of thousands of violent criminals, and now that same party wants to defund the agency that is charged with deporting these monsters. So we have a choice. I choose to support law enforcement. I'm not going to go along with the idea that we're going to give the Democrats the ability to kneecap ICE so they can get amnesty by lack of enforcement. And with that, Mr. President, I renew my motion. Did he already object? Okay.
Senator from Connecticut is recognized.
Mr. President, there's not a pending motion on the floor currently. Okay, Mr. President, seeking recognition on my own right.
Senator is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yesterday and today, Democrats have been on the floor asking for something very simple. Let's open up TSA. Let's open up FISA, which protects this country from cyber attack. Let's open up the Coast Guard. Let's open up FEMA. Republicans have said no repeatedly. Yesterday we said let's open all four agencies up together. Republicans denied us that motion. Today we're trying to see if we can open up one at a time. What Republicans are saying is that we want to hold TSA, our airports, the protection of our coastline, the defense of this nation from cyber attacks, and our response to emergencies hostage to their determination to continue to fund a law enforcement operation at ICE that is out of control. So Republicans are saying, we're going to keep TSA shut, we're going to keep the Coast Guard shut, we're going to keep FEMA shut until you allow the president to continue to terrorize our communities with a lawless, out-of-control ICE. And this isn't just what you see on the news. The scenes out of Minneapolis were horrific, unconscionable. American citizens being gunned down on the streets. One federal judge found that ICE is in violation of 96 different court orders right now, all across the country. Courts have ruled in 4,000 cases that ICE has jailed people illegally. ICE is behaving in a brazenly lawless and unconstitutional manner, and none of us, Republican or Democrat, should be interested in funding a part of the federal government that is operating outside of the bounds of law. We swore an oath to the Constitution. And so we have a serious discussion that is happening as we speak between Republicans and Democrats about how we can come together to fund ICE. But while that discussion happens, why are we keeping shut down the Coast Guard, TSA, FEMA? It's not necessary. If Republicans just stopped coming to the floor to object, we could open up TSA right now. We could get those salaries paid. I'm going to offer a motion to open up funding for the Coast Guard. We could get the people who protect our shorelines paid. And yes, this is a mess. This is a mess. I admit it, this is a mess. But we didn't have shutdowns when Democrats were in charge of the Senate. We are at a logjam because Republicans refuse to listen to the very reasonable concerns that Democrats and the American people have about the way that ICE is behaving. And by the way, we aren't representing some fringe political constituency. In the last national poll, 60% of Americans said that Congress should not fund ICE until they clean up their act. The vast majority of Americans believe that that agency is out of control. But if you went out there and asked those same Americans whether they think that TSA and the Coast Guard and FEMA should be shut down while we resolve those differences, they'd say, hell no. Open up the airports. Protect our shorelines. So we're going to continue to come to the floor and attempt to convince Republicans to release these hostages. I know that you are committed to supporting the president's lawlessness. I don't understand why you won't stand up and say it's wrong that there are 96 different court orders that ICE is violating, that it's wrong that American citizens are being killed on the streets, that it's wrong that schools are being tear-gassed. But while we are having this difference of opinion on ICE that is sort of hard to understand, don't hold the rest of the Department of Homeland Security hostage to your insistence that the president get to act outside the bounds of law when it comes to the enforcement of our immigration laws. So I'm going to offer a motion. And again, yesterday, we offered a motion to open up all of the rest of the Department of Homeland Security. I'm going to offer a more targeted motion. On the average day, the Coast Guard saves 12 lives, interdicts 1,250 pounds of cocaine, screens 300 vessels. It'd be really important to get our Coast Guard opened up. I know my colleague from Delaware thinks the same thing. Right before I offer the motion, just would yield to her for a quick question.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. I want to start off as the ranking member on the United States Coast Guard Subcommittee. And I stand here today, first of all, to acknowledge your leadership and to acknowledge the fact that it is surprising, I think, to most Americans that when we can get agreement on 90% of something, we don't act on that 90%. We have an opportunity right now. And again, as ranking member of the Coast Guard Subcommittee, we know that the Coast Guard keeps our nation safe in times of peace, but also in times of war. Even wars that weren't brought to Congress or that had no strategy or exit strategy, they do their job. From protecting our ports to helping our communities with search and rescue operations. The Coast Guard is critical to our nation's national security and safety. They patrol over 4.5 million square miles of ocean. They protect over 95,000 miles of U.S. coastline. They secure over 26,000 miles of commercial waterways and ensure the safety of over 360 ports, 3,700 marine terminals, and 25,000 miles of navigable channels. The men and women of the Coast Guard of the United States dedicate their lives to protecting the largest system of ports, waterways, and coastal seas in the world. And right now, over 42,000 active duty service members are uncertain about whether they will receive their next paycheck, and nearly 10,000 civilians who support their critical work are going without pay right now. Their next paychecks should actually be hitting their accounts in a couple of days, which is why what we do here today is so vital. I had the privilege of visiting the Sector Bay, Delaware Bay last summer, and I met the Coasties stationed there, and I got to hear firsthand how deeply connected they are to the mission, to our safety, our economy, and our national security. And it helped clarify immensely important that we must take care of the Coasties at home so that they can serve our country with confidence at sea. Again, right now, we are neglecting our duty. Politics aside, the Coast Guard has a job to do, and we have an opportunity to do something about it. Our colleagues ask us for more weeks. We got 2 weeks in the beginning. We're now weeks and weeks and weeks from those 2 weeks. The best way that we can support our Coast Guard men and women is to pay them. And while we as Democrats fight to address a broken agency that we know of as ICE, we have to recognize and pay our Coast Guard's men and women. So, Senator Murphy, do you agree that our colleagues across the aisle should join us in paying our Coast men and women without delay?
I thank the senator for the question. I do, especially at a time when the United States is at war. We cannot afford to have our coastlines undefended. The motions that Republicans have been making today have offered to pay the Coast Guard for 2 weeks. That's not good enough. Right now, this motion that I will make will allow the Coast Guard to be paid for the rest of the year. If the senator does not object to my motion, then minutes from now, the Coast Guard, the 52,000 people who work for the Coast Guard, will know that we honor their service and that we're going to pay them for the rest of the year. And so here's my motion. I'm going to ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of my bill at the desk that would fund the Coast Guard, that the bill be considered read 3 times and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table.
Is there an objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Missouri is recognized.
Reserving the right to object. Mr. President, my colleague from Connecticut just talked about minutes from now. Minutes ago, very same senator objected to Coast Guard funding. So here we are again with political gamesmanship and grandstanding for some clip to show that you actually want to fund the Coast Guard. Meanwhile, you just voted against the Coast Guard. The Democrats do not want to fund the Coast Guard because they're so hell-bent on defunding ICE. And the term out of control was used. You know what's out of control? The language being used on this floor to describe federal law enforcement. Nazis, the Gestapo. This is very dangerous. This is very dangerous. And I will tell you that I have great appreciation for the men and women who go into very dangerous situations to deport criminals who want to rape and murder our fellow citizens. I appreciate. So 5 reasons why I cannot go along with this scam. Laken Riley, Jocelyn Nungary, Kayla Hamilton, Dakara Thompson, and Haley Pegason. All Americans, all murdered by illegal aliens released by Democrats instead of being deported. So, what else is out of control? other than the Democrats' language. These leftist activist organizations that are creating the chaos in the streets. There are nine sanctuary jurisdictions in this country that actually probably are significant. In those 9 sanctuary jurisdictions, there is a 590% increase for anti-ICE attacks. They are creating conditions with the hope that they get some viral moment. This is dangerous. This is out of control. One more thing that's out of control, sanctuary jurisdictions writ large. And for the friends watching at home, what is a sanctuary jurisdiction that the Democrats are so proud of? They are local jurisdictions that will not tell federal law enforcement when an illegal alien rapist or murderer is being released from prison. It happened, by the way, the New Virginia governor just pledged that she won't do it. The monster, Abdul Jahala from Sierra Leone with 30 priors, who stabbed to death a fellow citizen of ours, she has pledged to not let ICE know when that monster is released from prison. That's who they are. That's what we're fighting against. And we're not going to allow them to kneecap our federal law enforcement from getting these monsters out of our country. They just voted against this. They just voted against the Coast Guard. They just voted against Secret Service. They just voted against TSA. They want to undermine law enforcement and give blanket amnesty to 15 million people here illegally. That's the truth. And with that, Mr. President, I object.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut is recognized again.
To my friend, you've lost this argument in the public. You just have. The public thinks that ICE is out of control. The public does not want ICE to continue operating in the way that they are operating. They have seen the scenes out of Minneapolis. They are watching what's happening in Vermont today, and they don't agree with you. The majority of Americans, by a large margin, say that what is happening today is out of control. And yes, you did offer motions to keep the Coast Guard open for 2 weeks. That doesn't help the peace of mind of the 52,000 people who work for the Coast Guard and wonder whether they're going to have more than one paycheck. You are objecting to a motion to keep them open for the rest of the year. And so tomorrow, when TSA is still not open and the Coast Guard is still not open and FEMA is still not operating, there's only one reason. Today, you are offering motions to keep them open for 2 weeks, and you are objecting to motions to keep those agencies open for the whole year. People are going to see the difference. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma is recognized.
Mr. President, it feels like Groundhog Day here on the Senate floor, trying to be able to resolve a problem. I wish we could all get in one room and be able to actually talk to each other like human beings and people, rather than this charade. 14 days ago, 2 weeks, 14 days ago, the White House sent over a proposal to my Democratic colleagues and said, we understand there are issues with ICE, we understand there are issues with CBP, so let me make a proposal to you of some options that we can do that we should be able to agree on. 14 days ago. Those options included mandatory body-worn cameras for ICE agents and CBP, mandatory. Name tags for every single agent to be able to have an identifier for every single agent that's out there. To be able to make sure that selective, sensitive sites did not have ICE involvement in those selective sites. De-escalation training for all of our federal officers to be able to know that techniques for how to be able to step down from a violent protester that's screaming in their face and waving a camera in their face. A full, open investigation of the 2 shootings that happened in Minnesota, reducing the footprint of the number of agents in Minnesota, a change in the way that warrants are actually used across the country. The White House laid all those things out 14 days ago that one of my Democratic colleagues who is on this floor said to me was entirely reasonable offer from the White House. 14 days ago. And since that time period, radio silence from my Democratic colleagues. White House had no response. So TSA agents are not being paid, FEMA agents are not being paid, cybersecurity folks are not being paid, while we wait for the counteroffer. What is happening is good politics from my Democratic colleagues. They feel like this is good politics to be able to continue to be able to press in, that some folks on the far, far, far left want to defund ICE and want to show there's a huge fight to be able to take on ICE. The result of that is 250,000 people, families, individuals that work with DHS wait for an answer. Wait. This has got to get resolved. The politics in this moment has got to stop. I was here last Thursday saying all of us should stay and stay over the weekend and not leave until this is resolved. Everybody just left. $250,000 DHS employees are looking at this room right now and saying, stop bickering about this, just solve it. Whoever's got the paper, just answer it. Just go back and forth, let's figure this out. Let's actually just solve this. So we have tried multiple times to say, let's fund it. The White House has made good faith offers to say, here are offers to be able to get some dialogue going if somebody will actually talk back to me. But while we wait on the politics to cool, in the meantime, I need to offer again what we started with at the very beginning, and that was just, can we at least open things up for 2 weeks like we did at the beginning? We started this battle weeks and weeks and weeks ago, and we started with, okay, we agree on all the other appropriation bills. We don't agree on this one because it has funding for ICE, because it has funding for CBP in it, and so we can't get agreement on that. Can we at least keep status quo and keep debating so that the fight is here at this room rather than affecting families that literally are trying to get grocery coupons and gift cards from people so they can feed their families? Can we at least, at a minimum, do 2 weeks like we did at the start of this? If we can't agree on everything, let's at least keep us open. Now, this body knows I've been fighting for years to say we should never have a government shutdown at all. I literally don't know how many times I've been on this floor talking about this issue, saying government shutdowns should be a thing of the past. We should be here 24/7 until we solve the problem, hold all those federal workers harmless. If we can't get to that, which we've not been able to get agreement to at least do that, then let's at least have a continuing resolution that pays everyone at DHS for the next 2 weeks while we keep arguing until we can resolve our issues. So I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to immediate consideration of calendar number 156, H.R. 4553. I further ask the substitute amendment 4353 be considered and agreed to. The bill as amendment be considered and read a third time and passed, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator from California.
Thank you, Mr. President. As we've been having this debate over a series of motions here over the last hour plus, first of all, a status quo position for CBP and ICE is not acceptable. We've seen the violations of people's civil rights across the country for the better part of this last year. Last year alone, it was the deadliest year for detainees in ICE custody, and calendar year to date, we're on track to surpass that by a lot. So no, the status quo is not acceptable. For the other departments and agencies, TSA, Coast Guard, FEMA, FISA, et cetera, why settle for 2 weeks? We should fund them for the balance of the federal fiscal year. I think we'll have an additional motion to that effect in a minute, but on the motion currently before us, Mr. President, I object.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Where's
Mr. President.
Oh, back to Senator from California.
Mr. President, thank you again. And so in the few minutes that we have left before the scheduled vote, I do want to make things abundantly clear to the American people who are watching at home. Democrats are here trying to reopen and pay the employees of TSA, members of the Coast Guard, folks who work at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and, of course, FEMA. That's right. Democrats are trying to address the issue of security lines at airports, protect Americans from cyber attacks. We want to pay the brave women and men of the Coast Guard and to help Americans rebuild after disasters. And Republicans are blocking these efforts one after another. The question that's holding this all up, folks, is whether or not we, in this process, should hold ICE and CBP accountable with the same basic standards that apply to just about every other law enforcement agency in the country at the state level and at the local level. Reforms that my colleague from Oklahoma said were common sense. I'm glad to hear that from the Republican side of the aisle, so let's incorporate that into federal statute. But they refuse to do so thus far. Let's remember, ICE and CBP already have billions and billions of additional dollars from the Republican so-called Big Beautiful Bill last year. So ICE and CBP are in zero danger of running out of money. Who is at danger of running out of money? It's TSA, it's the Coast Guard, it is FISA, and it is FEMA. And so that's why Democrats have put these series of motions forward. Now, in a minute here, my colleague from California, Senator Schiff, will ask for unanimous consent to pass a bill that we introduced together to pay the critical FEMA employees and sustain their essential operations for the rest of the year. Because we know how natural disasters act. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when the next one will strike. And whether it's a hurricane or a tornado or an earthquake or a flood, we know it's coming, we just don't know where it's coming. And the federal government has an obligation to the American people to be ready to act on a moment's notice. So let's give FEMA the funding that they need. And I'll defer now to my colleague from California.
Mr. President, just over a year ago, Los Angeles County fell victim to the worst natural disaster in my lifetime. The Eden and Palisade fires were unthinkable tragedies. Lives taken, livelihoods incinerated, old photographs, family heirlooms, childhood homes gone forever. The homes of more constituents, friends, staff gone, along with the place where my wife and I got married. Whole blocks of neighborhoods razed with indiscriminate and random destruction. In the years since, alongside Senator Padilla, I've worked to help the families impacted by these fires in every way I can. I visited recovery efforts in the earliest days of the fire, meeting with survivors and lending a hand where I could to help families grieving what these fires took from them. My team and I have facilitated federal, state, and local connections for these communities, trying to ensure they have the resources they need to recover. I've introduced legislation to help families better protect their homes in the future and to bring down insurance rates. But so much work remains. It has been more than a year since the fires, and Congress has yet to move forward on much-needed federal disaster aid for LA County. We have urged the President to act. We have called on Congress to act, just as we have with fires, hurricanes, and floods of the past in states red and blue, to pass a supplemental that gives us a fighting chance at building stronger than before. And yet, for the first time, disaster relief is being apportioned not on the basis of need, but on the basis of political affiliation, as if these fires discriminate between homes that voted for the President and those that did not. We've called on the President and this Congress to drop discrimination against California or other states based on no more than its political leanings, and we continue that call today. But the lack of disaster aid for California and other states is not the only place where this Congress is failing to meet the needs of the American people. Right now, the very federal agency we call upon to facilitate disaster recovery, FEMA, is shut down. The agency whose job it is to provide financial assistance to families and aid the recovery process until houses can be rebuilt and families can move back into their homes has no money from Congress to operate. As a result, this critical agency, already understaffed, has an even more diminished capacity to help do these critical jobs. This has gone on for weeks and is unacceptable, and that is what we are here today to change. With this legislation, we can reopen FEMA today. We can give paychecks to the people whose job it is to get Los Angeles and communities across the country back on their feet. We can remove unnecessary slowdowns in the approval processes, in recovery applications because of the lack of staffing. We can put ourselves on a pathway to finally passing a disaster aid package. Now, this is not the first time we tried to reopen FEMA. Senate Democrats have tried to call up and pass legislation to open this agency multiple times in recent weeks, but we have been told no. And why? Because my colleagues across the aisle continue to insist that this agency and others like TSA and Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and the Coast Guard cannot reopen until we pass another multi-billion-dollar infusion of resources for ICE and CBP. Senate Democrats have been clear, not another dime for these immigration enforcement agencies until we see real reforms, until they take off the masks and put on the body cams, until they're held to the same standard as a neighborhood cop on the beat, until their standard of no judicial warrant, no problem, is torn out of the training manual. That is not too much to ask. In the aftermath of Americans watching DHS storming city apartment buildings like they were behind enemy lines, or ICE dragging citizens from their homes, or CBP gunning down Americans in cold blood in the street, this cannot be too much to ask. We're seeing families torn apart, citizens detained without medical care, fathers and mothers, grandfathers and grandmothers, aunts and uncles, children detained because of the color of their skin or the language they speak or where they work. We see DHS spending $140 million on assault weapons, Glocks and tasers, and countless more on building massive new detention centers. And so we are insisting on reform. We reject the false choice the majority would give us that we cannot reform ICE until we agree to give ICE billions more. These cannot be the only two choices. Let's pass this common sense bill and reopen FEMA today. Let's get disaster recovery efforts moving forward. We can do both. We can help Californians in need and others across the country. And so, as if in legislative session and notwithstanding Rule 22, on behalf of Senator Padilla and myself, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of the bill at the desk to make continuing appropriations for the federal emergency management pay and operations in the event of a federal government shutdown and for other purposes, that the bill be considered read 3 times and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma is recognized.
Reserving the right to object. Mr. President, I'll be brief in some comments on this. I just wish all that was so, that was just stated. The White House has presented a set of ideas in paper and reform, put them into legislative text, and handed them to Democrats 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, and said, here are the reforms that we would agree with that you've asked for. Badges, body-worn cameras, de-escalation training, process reforms, all those things they put out there. And for 2 weeks, my Democratic colleagues have determined the politics is better than the actual solution. And so they've just said, let's do the politics. The problem with the politics on this is 250,000 DHS employees are not being paid right now. So it doesn't make good politics for them. They're trying to figure out how to feed their family. By the way, again, I had a TSA agent from Oklahoma City who do, by the way, a great job, say to me just last week, I feel like my paycheck is bipolar. I just never know whether it's going to be there or not. because my Democratic colleagues have shut down the government just over and over again as their protests against Trump. And I get it. They don't like President Trump. They voiced that. But I don't know what my FEMA agents that are working on tornado relief in Oklahoma have to do with their frustration with ICE. So they come and bring a proposal and to say, well, FEMA has had a bias and President Trump has had a bias against California with FEMA. And I smile honestly and think, you know, last year, or a year and a half ago, I guess now, President Biden's FEMA instructed FEMA agents not to go to the houses in disaster areas that had a Trump yard sign in their front yard. So if you want to talk bias of FEMA, the Biden administration, FEMA, not going to help on disaster relief on houses that had a Trump yard sign, let's talk bias. So I don't agree with that at all. Here's what we need to do. Stop this, sit down like grown-ups, and actually solve the problem. Because this whole issue of I'll fund everything but ICE and CBP doesn't really work for the ICE and CBP families. I know you may be mad at them, but you know what? Those secretaries and those assistants and those folks that work in all those offices, they have lives and families as well. Can I tell you what CBP does? It's not just Border Patrol. CBP also is managing what's happening at our ports of entry. Let me be specific on this. There are 9,000 CBP agents that work in California. 2,000 of those CBP agents are working at the Los Angeles Long Beach port of entry. They're handling the port stuff coming in and out right now. They're not dealing with Border Patrol, they're not dealing with ICE, but my Democratic colleagues say we can't fund CBP, including those families that are in California at the Long Beach port. They have nothing to do with all of this. They just want to get a paycheck and to be able to know where they're going. And it has been very, very clear that if we don't fund ICE and CBP, my Democratic colleagues have been very clear, we're not going to fund them. We see the strategy. The strategy is very clear. Those folks won't be paid. They will eventually quit, and they'll get what they want. No Border Patrol, no ICE, because all the families will quit. So listen, I object to this, but I encourage this body to actually sit down, look at what the White House presented 2 weeks ago, make a counterproposal if you disagree, do something, but let's get off the dime on this and actually get this resolved for those 250,000 families. I object.
The objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Louisiana is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to waive the mandatory quorum call with respect to Cal 3, number 311, HR 747, and let's start the vote as we were supposed to do at 1:45.
Without objection, the clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the motion to proceed to counter number 311, HR 7147, an act making further consolidated appropriations and so forth and for other purposes, signed by 17 senators.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call under Rule 22 has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the motion to proceed to H.R. 7147, an act making further consolidated appropriations for the fiscal year ended September 30, 2026, and for other purposes shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsor-Brooks. Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt-Rochester,
Covering for Bernie for you, so you can get out of here. But I'm still laughing because, like, this is not that hard.